Thank you very much, Melanie, and thank you for all of you inviting me and the work that you are doing. I appreciate all of our chambers and the frustrations and the troubles that all of you are going through. We are focused on the disease, but we do know that there are other consequences that are very, very difficult to deal with. I think today I will focus a little bit on some issues and maybe get some feedback from you on some advice that you might have for us about, and I'm not going to use specific numbers, so nobody please try to quote me on this, but about 6 weeks ago, we had our highest rates of COVID-19 in Jefferson County, where we were having between 40 and 50 new cases every day. We were able, fortunately, to keep from overwhelming the hospitals and the ICUs and the ventilator use, and we began to come down. And about every week, we came down about 10. And so we had 40 to 50 a week, then we had a day, then we had 30 to 40 a day, we got down to 20 to 30 a day. We actually got down to where we were having below 10 new cases a day. And other things were going on, of course, in society. And at that particular time, we were having Memorial Day, and then we had 4th of July, and we also had the governor opening up a bit more as far as businesses that could be doing business, expanding the numbers of people that could be like in restaurants and in venues and things. So as we began to open up, we were very curious and concerned about what is this going to do to the rates that we're seeing in Jefferson County and in Colorado. And over the past couple of weeks, unfortunately, we have seen we're calling it an uptick, but it really is a swelling again of the numbers of cases that we're seeing. And we are currently back to the 20 to 30, and actually some days we're having more than 30 new cases a day. Across the country, there are some interesting changes. They are seeing that the new wave or the increased waves now are more in the younger people, the 20 to 30-year-olds. That sort of goes along with the theory that it's because of the parties around Memorial Day and 4th of July. We have not yet been able to tease it out enough in our numbers here to really show that, and we're not seeing that it is in those younger ages yet. We're still looking at the data and trying to figure out exactly what is going on. But we are concerned that we are seeing this rise. We still are seeing that our hospitalization rates are not skyrocketing, that they are staying steady, and that we are not overwhelming the hospital system. I think throughout this whole COVID experience, hospitals have learned better how to deal with COVID, and we have found several modalities that can be used, such as dexamethasone and other things. They also are using ventilators a bit different. And we're seeing the death rates go down or stay fairly stable. So we are not seeing a rise in death rates. We're not seeing a real rise in hospitalization rates. We are now beginning to see a rise in what we call the positivity rate, meaning of all of the tests that we take, how many of those tests are showing up positive. One of the arguments has been we're seeing more cases because we're doing more testing. And of course, that will be true. The more testing you do, the more cases you will find, as long as there are more cases out there. And so the positivity rate helps us to sort of differentiate between, is it just because we're doing more testing, or are we finding that of all of those we're testing, more of them are positive? That is beginning to tick up a little bit too in Jefferson County and in the Denver metro region. And so we're watching that closely. So there are some issues that we have some concerns about. As we begin to see some of this, there are only certain tools that we have that we can use to try to back things down. The most onerous tool that we have would be to close down the economy again. And you know that the governor has already taken some steps in doing that he has closed bars again and several things like that, so that trying to cut down on those areas where people basically go to to keep from social distancing. They go to get together and they go to congregate. And so that has happened. One of the other tools that we're looking at is a mandatory face mask. And I'm sure you have been listening to what's going on around the Denver metro region as that, around that. The Tri-County Health Department, Board of Health moved to make a mandatory face mask order for the Tri-County areas. They did allow jurisdictions to opt out, but there has been already some real negative pushback, at least from one county, saying that they're going to pull out of Tri-County Health Department. They also have been overwhelmed with emails and folks saying, thank you, this is going to help us in our business, this is going to help us to keep the rate of infection down. So it has become very political, or at least very ideological, with large amounts of people on both sides feeling very strongly about the issue. As we look at what we need to do here in Jefferson County, that has come up. Should we be looking more at a mandatory face mask? When this first came up around the Denver metro region, we looked very closely at the research that was out there. And at that time, which was about 5 or 6 weeks ago, at that time, all of the research that we had on using face masks was really built around studies of influenza, not around COVID. And there was sort of a mixed bag of signals. Some said they were very helpful, some said that they weren't helpful. And we did not feel there was an overwhelming scientific support for the use of masks at that time. We also knew that we did not have the authority or the individuals out there to really enforce this. In talking to law enforcement agencies around the county, they also did not feel they had the resources to enforce a face mask order. And we were seeing the downtick in the numbers. So based on all of that evidence, we felt that we could rely on what some people call Jeff Go Strong, that Jefferson County residents would do the right thing, that we would strongly encourage and support the use of face masks, but we did not put into place a public health order to that effect like Denver did and Boulder did, and now Tri-County has. We're reviewing that as we're beginning to see an uptick in the number of cases, and as more studies have come out showing that actually face masks do help to decrease the spread of COVID-19. And honestly, we are getting a lot of requests, or at least a fair amount of requests from businesses and from communities saying it would really help us if the county would put in place a mandatory face mask order, so that we could rely on telling our clients, the county this is an order, this is the law, you have to do it, instead of just doing it as a business policy at the local business level. So I would love to have some feedback from all of you as we look at this. Would this be something that would be helpful to you and your businesses? Is this something that you see as onerous? It's always dangerous to ask for advice, because then if you don't take people's advice, they get mad at you. But we're taking a very close look at this, and I am very interested in knowing what the chambers of commerce and those who are really on the front lines of business think about this. So if it's all right, I'd like to kind of open it up and hear some of your thoughts.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, I've not done this before, but I'm going to put a poll out there on Zoom to see, just to get a poll. It's going to be a quick one. Yes to the mask mandate. No, you don't want that. But if you would like to make a comment or talk, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, and let's have a chat about that real quick.
I see Angela has raised her hand. I don't know how she can be unmuted though.
Let's see. Angela, are you?
I'm sorry, Melanie, I didn't warn you that I'd be doing this.
Oh, you're fine. We like to work on the fly, Mark. We're good. Angela, I can't unmute you. For some reason, it's not unmuting. So if you would like to, if you can unmute yourself, you're welcome to do that.
I'll jump in while Angela unmutes. Hi, Dr. Johnson. It's Scott Milne. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Sorry.
I wholly agree with a mask mandate. Again, it's very, very important, and we do not need our hospitals here overrun. That is really quite scary for all of us, even the ones that aren't in a hospital. The masks are very important. The masks are very important, and they've been proven to be effective. And since masks are not necessarily for you, they're for the other person. I don't see how we can't, in good consciousness, not mandate a mask order. So thank you for considering it.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate your comments. I will say one thing though, and this is not going to sound nice because it's not nice. I have come to believe through all of this, from all of the emails and phone mails and voicemails that I've gotten, that asking people to do something for someone else isn't working well. And so I would also highlight the fact that wearing a mask also protects yourself and your family, so that even if you are not altruistic or thinking of others, even if you're just thinking of yourself, masks also help. So and I think we've maybe oversold the fact that I wear a mask for you instead of for me. And I think we need to talk a little bit more about you also wear a mask for yourself. So thank you, Scott.
Mark, can you tell us a little bit about what a mask mandate would look like? I have not looked into Tri-County's mask mandate. Is it for open areas? If you're outside, is it just walking into businesses? How does that work?
Essentially, it's two major things. And there are mask orders that we're looking at, like I said, Boulder, Larimer County, and Tri-County and Denver. All of them are a little bit different, but the essential things that they ask for is that when you are in public where you cannot keep social distancing, where you can't keep 6 feet away from somebody, you should wear a mask. If you're going into a business, you should wear a mask. If you're going into any place where, again, you can't keep that social distancing. In offices where you are working closer than 6 feet to somebody else, you should wear a mask. If you are in your own office, like I am right now, and there's nobody around you, there's no need to wear a mask. If you are out hiking or biking and there's no one around you, there is no need to wear a mask. But my wife and I hike on North Table Mountain quite a bit. And for a lot of the time, you're away from everybody, but then there's certain places where the trail gets narrow and you're passing a lot of people, and very few people are wearing masks. So we carry our mask, we put it on when we see somebody coming or hear somebody coming from behind us, and we know we're not going to be able to keep that distance. But the essential thing is, if you're going into a public place where you're not able to keep social distancing, or you're indoors in a business, that's where the mask would be asked to be used. That clear, Melanie?
Yes, thank you for that. Okay, I'm gonna.
Mindy Hansen makes a good point, and that is one of the reasons we think masks are so important is when this disease first came out, they were told by the Chinese that it only is passed if you have symptoms. Now we know that's not true, that a lot of the spread of this disease is happening before people even know they are infected. And so wearing a mask when you're around other people, it helps to cut down on that spread.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
I've noticed that when I get together with people, we all show up with masks and everybody has great intentions. And then I think maybe we kind of check each other out and think, oh, everyone here is healthy. And before I know it, all the masks are off. And I feel like maybe a governmental mandate might help alleviate that. I'm not sure.
I agree with you. I think that what a governmental mandate, it makes us the bad guys instead of you all or anybody else having to be the bad guys. But I think you're right that when people get together, I went to a wedding and my wife and I wore our masks for the whole thing. We kept socially distanced. But as the evening wore on, more and more people took off their masks. They got together. I think it's just natural human nature that we want to socialize, and that you end up thinking, well, you know, I can trust you because I know you or because we're friends. And I think maybe having a public health order does remind people it's the law. We have to wear these. Even though I do trust you and I feel comfortable around you, I'm going to do it because it's the law. So I think there is something to that, Karen.
So Mark, can you address, and Leslie, feel free to jump in with this too. How do we, if that is a mandate, if we make that a law, how do we enforce that?
That's the real kicker in all of this. And that is, as I mentioned earlier, we do not have the resources. My staff do not wear badges and carry guns or give out tickets. And for the most part, our local law enforcement do not have the resources or the time to do a lot of that either. I noticed that Inglewood is planning to give out tickets, $15 tickets the first time, 25, all of that. I'm not sure how their law enforcement feel about that. But essentially, we don't have a real good enforcement mechanism. And it sort of falls back kind of like our laws around secondhand smoke, where we don't really have a lot of enforcement ability to do that. And yet when we put into place those laws, the civic duty of individuals, the social responsibility, the social contract, the moral persuasion somehow helped us really decrease secondhand smoke exposure. And that's kind of what we'd rely on around this. Sort of as Karen said, it's not so much that somebody's going to come and give me a ticket or put me in jail. With COVID-19, that's the last thing we want to do is put anybody in jail with that. But it is just sort of we're relying on society to live to the law. And I still believe 85 to 90% of the people are going to follow the law, even just because they feel that that's what's the right thing to do. There will be some people who will flaunt it. We have been spending a lot of time this week with folks who are flaunting things like that. And there will be some, but I think you'll have more people who feel they have the ability to tell somebody, hey, put on your mask, it helps me, or, you know, it's the law, please do this. If there is a law, then just sort of relying on strong encouragement. But you're right. The Achilles heel in almost all of our public health orders is the enforcement.
Okay. So if you have not answered the poll, go ahead and answer that now. Can you all see the poll response, or is that just for me? Everybody can see it? I'm getting yeses and nos. I'm not sure.
I saw the poll, but I can't see the responses.
Oh, okay. Okay. So the responses right now, I have 21 have said yes to the mask mandate and 3 have said no to the mask mandate. So I don't see numbers. It's an anonymous poll. If you haven't answered that, go ahead and answer that. So basically we're looking at 88% of those that responded are saying yes and 13% are saying no. I'm happy to throw some polls out on social media, but I'm pretty sure I'd start a really rough conversation.
I have been advised by our law enforcement for me to stay off of social media for a while.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. That really is very helpful. Again, we're not going to get 100% on anything, but that gives me some things to think about and some things to use as to backing up as we move forward. I'm still not convinced what we're going to do, but I hope we can do something rather quickly if we do need to move forward. So thank you very much. I apologize. I need to leave to go meet with some other folks at this time. I hope that's all right, Melanie.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. John. As I keep this poll open for a little bit longer, and then I'll email you the results just so you have that for reference, but I really appreciate you logging on today. So thanks, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the kind comments that I've seen in the chat room. I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much.
You too. Okay, Commissioner Dahlkemper. So I have about 7 minutes before we have our speakers for Jefferson County Public Schools coming on. I know Lisa Cutter, Representative Lisa Cutter, where are you? I see that you jumped on earlier too. So I'd love to give a couple minutes to each of you to just see what you're seeing on your side.
Perfect. And I'll be brief so we can hear from Representative Cutter as well. First, I really want to thank all of you for weighing in on the debate about whether we should wear masks or we shouldn't wear masks. And I stand in favor of mandatory masks in Jefferson County. And here's why. I feel our county has worked so incredibly hard to flatten that curve. And when I hear Dr. Johnson say we're now looking at an uptick of 20, sometimes 30 or more cases a day, that concerns me. And if we can do one simple thing, like wearing a mask, to help prevent the spread, to protect others and ourselves, it makes a whole lot of sense to me. We're seeing that happen metro-wide as well. And instead of having a patchwork, I think if we can have all of us, to the best of our ability, wearing those masks, the greater impact it will make. I just also want to give a huge shout out to Dr. Johnson. He has been at the epicenter of this issue. And this is a person who thought he was going to retire, and he decided to stay with it. We couldn't find quite the director that we were hoping for, and I couldn't be more grateful and thankful that he is in the position that he is currently in, thanks to his steadfast leadership. He's been extraordinary through what has been a very challenging time in our county. I'm going to just switch gears quickly and touch on wildfire mitigation. A couple quick things. The Colorado Fire Commission met just this past week to review final recommendations that it will then send to the Wildfire Matters Committee, which Representative Cutter serves on, and bills will be developed in 3 key areas, looking at the Emergency Fire Fund and updating that. That fund hasn't been updated since the 1960s, believe it or not. And as you know, forest health has changed significantly. The threat of wildfire risk is huge in Jeffco. We're the #1 county in terms of property loss, business loss, business property loss due to wildfire risk. I'm one of 2 county commissioners that serves on that statewide committee. So that effort is moving forward with a focus on data collection, mutual aid, and resources. And then the Jeffco Wildfire Risk Reduction Task Force is hard at work. Our committees are meeting as committees throughout the summer to develop their recommendations for ideas that we should be looking at the county level. That focuses on everything from enhanced partnership and collaboration. How do we think about resources to improve forest health with the help of Jeffco Open Space? And of course, how do we also look at issues that are related to public awareness and communications? And then last but not least, we also are seeing lots of help from Congressman Joe Neguse. I serve on another task force led by Colorado Concerns, which is made up of CEOs across Jefferson County, but they have a really interesting blend of different individuals with different backgrounds serving on different committees that are feeding up recommendations to our Colorado congressional delegation. And the area that I focus on is environment and energy, and a big component of that is wildfire mitigation. And one of the areas we're focusing on, in addition to forest health, is also looking at how do we harden our public utilities? I mean, we saw the devastating loss in Paradise, California, and in other communities. So we're working closely with, Excel and others to really think through what that looks like. And Congressman Neguse has already introduced shovel-ready infrastructure projects, both to help with job creation, which we know is so important, but also to invest more dollars into wildfire mitigation. So thanks so much. And those are just some quick updates on the wildfire side as we're in wildfire season, and we have a stage 2 fire ban in place that was just announced just a few days ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I appreciate your update.
Sure.
So, Representative Cutter.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you, Melanie.
Thanks for joining us today, Lisa.
Oh, I'm so glad to pop in for a little bit. I'm not on video. We're up in the mountains with our family, and we had a crazy late night doing crossword puzzles. So I'm not video friendly this morning. So, but I'm happy to see you all. And yeah, I want to echo what Leslie said about Dr. Johnson. I've just been amazed. And I was actually at all his hard work and thoughtful leadership on this. And I am in complete agreement about the mask mandate. I think that to me, it's a consumer confidence issue as well. I think when I walk into a business and they're taking every precaution they can and wearing masks, it makes me feel so much better about continuing to visit them and to give them my business. So I hope people, and it seems like most of the businesses I visited in our district are being very mindful of that, and I appreciate that a lot. We all want everyone to get back to normal as soon as possible, and that normal just might look like wearing masks for longer, but it seems like a relatively easy trade-off, you know. So anyway, thank you for that, and thanks for sparking that conversation. And also to Leslie, thanks for the work on the wildfire issues. We don't have any interim committees this summer at the legislature because of COVID. But I'm hoping to continue to work. If I am privileged to be reelected, then I'm hoping to continue working on wildfire issues. I was really sad that we had to set some of that work aside this last session because of COVID and the abbreviated session. But I will just flag for you really quickly. I'm sure we need to move on to the next speaker, but we did a bunch of bills, COVID related bills, to help citizens, food pantry assistance that I sponsored, a utilities assistance bill I also sponsored, and one that I'm really, really proud of, and I think I've shared this information with you and Betsy, Melanie, is the Climber Act that I was a prime sponsor of, a big package to provide funding for businesses between 5 and 100 people. And it's low, it's loans at below market rates. And it's a great public-private partnership, not using general fund money, which is difficult for us in this climate. We don't have a lot of flexibility with our budget. But anyway, it's going to provide relief to a lot of businesses, and I'm absolutely thrilled about the opportunity to help with that. And the other one we did, I cannot remember the numbers of these bills, but I can certainly provide info to anyone who's interested. We also did a grant program for businesses any size, small, but primarily small businesses up to 100 people. So less than 5 employees are eligible for an actual grant program from the state. So, and I know the county has done many things along those lines as well. So we all are very aware of the fact that you are all the heart and soul of Colorado. Small business is what keeps our state running. It's what gives our state character, and we appreciate all of you. And thanks again for all the work you're doing. And as always, if anyone has any issues or concerns about anything, please reach out to me, lisa.cutter.colorado@gmail.com.
And I'll post some information about those funding opportunities. Lisa, are those completely finalized? Are those live?
You know what? That's a good question, Melanie. I should double check on that because we just signed them a couple weeks ago, and I know at that time we didn't have info on it. So I'll have my aide look into that and send you all the information you need to post those.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, I saw Dr. Tom McDermott with Jefferson County. Is Christopher Shu on? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name right. Tom, thanks for joining us this morning.
Yes, thank you all for having me, and Christopher, we appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, Christopher, I see your name now. So thank you for both of you for jumping on. I'm sure your lives have been crazy trying to come up with the restart plan for Jefferson County. I'm glad I'm not in your shoes, but I'm thrilled that you were able to take the time, and really, I know it's been a long process and you've put a lot of effort into figuring out the best way to do this for our community. So I would love to get an update from you guys. So thanks for joining us, and let us share what you'd like.
Thank you for the lead in. So we'll do quick introductions here. And Melanie, if we could have rights to share our screen, Tom and I have got some slides and an intro from Dr. Glass we'd like to show as well.
Yep. I am.
I'd like to say hello to Leslie Dahlkamper, who I see here on the screen. Hi, Leslie. Leslie was the president of our school board. If you folks, I'm sure you know that. I'm a big fan of Leslie Dahlkamper, and I see Tammy Story's on here as well. So folks, just my connection with Conifer, just so you know, I was the principal of Evergreen Middle School for a number of years back in, I'm trying to remember those dates, 2008 until 2013. So we might have crossed paths during my time working there in the mountains, and sure did love my time working in Evergreen. All right.
I think you can share now.
All right, let me try here. Yep. Okay, so my name is Christopher Hsu. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Jeffco Public Schools, and I've been in Jeffco for 20 years, serving in a number of different roles. And just happy to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity, and want to introduce my colleague, Tom McDermott. As was stated, we've been working on the Restart Plan. So Tom, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Dr. Tom McDermott, I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Jeffco Public Schools, and excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
So thanks everybody. So we're here to talk about the Jeffco Restart Plan. And just to frame this, what this plan is all about is trying to strike that balance between public health. And I heard from Dr. Mark Johnson, and Tom and I are big fans of Dr. Mark Johnson, and we had an opportunity to meet with him. We have a director of health services in Jeffco Public Schools that talks with Dr. Mark Johnson a lot. So we need his guidance, and he really helps us frame the plan. So that's one of the two frameworks, is public health, and what are we doing to make sure that we are following the highest health guidelines. So when we restart school, our students are in the healthiest environment and our staff are in a really healthy environment. So that's one side. The other side of it is equity in student education. So we want to have an environment where kids are thriving and they're learning and they're excited and engaged to be in school. So that's kind of it. Those are our guardrails, as Tom and I worked on this plan and engaged with so many other people to put it together. So there's that intro, and we'll keep on moving here. This will give you a timeline of where we've been and where we are now. So I'm going to take us all the way back even earlier, back on March 12th. And March 12th is when the COVID numbers really began to spike here in the United States, especially in Colorado, to the point where our public health officials were concerned that there weren't enough hospital beds to meet the needs of the COVID cases. And of course, we know our governor went to the stay-at-home order. And we went through a major shift in Jeffco from an in-person learning environment to a remote learning environment. And we were ready to go on that. We had been planning that for a couple of months. So when that announcement was made on Thursday, the 12th, we actually moved into a learning environment remote on Tuesday, the 17th. And because of our community and you folks I'm talking to right now, especially folks who live in Jeffco, because of the bond in the mill, especially the mill that was passed before that, we were able to fund and distribute technology to our students. So because we had technology in the hands of our students and we had prepared and trained our teachers on doing that, we were able to move in that remote environment. Now, it wasn't without bumps, just know that. If there are teachers here on the call, you know that we had to do a lot of work just to smooth that out. And there was some equity concerns that Dr. McDermott will talk about here in a little bit. But that's what was happening in March all the way through the spring as we were in a remote environment. We learned a lot from that remote environment as well. But then what we did is we started to think forward to how are we going to open school in the fall. So already we were engaging with Dr. Mark Johnson and our teams of people within Jeffco and our community to talk about what that could look like. So we put out what we called the Restart Draft, and that was on May 13th. And on May 13th, the draft was put out, and it was totally, the environment was a hybrid environment. And what that means is a hybrid is opening school where only 50% of students would be in school on any given day. Because at that time, we had a limitation of that only 10 people could be in a room, if you all remember that, if you were operating in your work environment. So the hybrid was, if we can only have 10 people in a room, then we have to limit the amount of students that are coming back. So that original plan that was put out was all about, we will have students in a remote environment on certain days, and we will have students in an in-person environment on certain days. So then the first time you folks saw that was when we put out the Restart model. and that was right here on May 22nd. And the model also was a hybrid. We had taken all the feedback we have gotten from our staff members from the draft, and then we turned it into the model. So the model was all about the hybrid, and that's how we operated for all the way through June, was that we could only have 10 people in the room. So we were going to be limited on the number of students that could be in school. Well, then things began to change. COVID rates began to decrease. And then it changed, as you know, from a stay-at-home order to a safer at home order and enjoy the great outdoors. So then we began to change a little bit in our thinking. And then it turned into, let's come back at 100% capacity. So we launched our restart plan on Wednesday, July 8th. So you folks might have seen that and read through some of that, especially the executive summary. So that is where we are focusing right now, is we will come back to school at 100% capacity, which means school as normal, which means kids are coming back, but we have all kinds of health mitigation strategies that are in place, and learning will look a little bit differently because, of course, we'll be wearing masks. They are required, and we are cohorting students or putting students together in groupings during the day. And then the last part, the last box right here, is we will continue to monitor and adjust. So as we know, COVID-19 cases are now on the rise in Colorado. So we need to be ready. So we will continue to monitor. And if there is some type of governor's orders, or we do get health guidelines from Mark Johnson that changed a little bit, we could be looking at potentially a shift, and we would be ready for that in a hybrid plan or a remote plan. So really it's about contingency planning here in Jeffco, just to make sure. The other part, if you want to look down here at this box, and it says testing. Just so you know, throughout this entire process, we continue to test our model. And we have teachers on the testing group, we have principals on this testing group, and we continue to test and test and test all of our thinking just to make sure that this is going to play well in a real environment. We actually have model schools now that are online. So we have Dunstan Middle School, we have Shelton Elementary, and Wheat Ridge will come online today. I'll be there this afternoon. And what we will start doing is we will start bringing our educators through our model schools so they can see what it looks like. They can see what signage looks like, what health screening will look like at the front door, the questions that we'll ask. We'll see what our one-way hallways look like, how our classrooms are set up differently. So all of our educators will have an idea of what that looks like. And then they can go back to their school and begin implementing not only the restart plan, but how it's going to look as far as signage and one-way hallways. So there's that. And then we've got a short video that we want to play from our superintendent, Dr. Jason Glass. So here we go.
Hi, Jeffco Public Schools students, staff, parents, and community. I'm Jason Glass, Superintendent and Chief Learner, and I'd like to tell you some of
Christopher, you need to unmute so we can hear.
incorporated
Oh,
those
sorry
in
about
this
that. My dog was barking.
We also compared our plan to similar plans from other countries and from other districts here in the United States and in Colorado. We also work closely with local and regional public health agencies, checking and getting guidance on our assumptions and decisions all along the way. Jeffco Public Schools will offer 2 educational options for this coming school year, a 100% in-person option and a 100% remote option. For parents choosing the in-person option for their student, they can expect school to be very different than before COVID-19. These changes will include, but are not limited to, the following: temperature and symptom screenings before entering buildings, increased spacing and alternating seating on district busing, adjusted school start and ending times to account for new procedures at school, hand washing and hygiene protocols for all persons in our school buildings, mandatory face coverings when 6-foot social distancing cannot be maintained or other special conditions exist. As much as possible, keeping students together in common groups or cohorts. Changes in how students move through and use buildings, including directional hallways and no use of large common spaces such as gyms or cafeterias. These virus mitigation strategies are not optional. If you choose in-person learning for your family, you're also choosing to follow these efforts to keep our schools as safe as possible. For families choosing the 100% remote learning option, your student will stay connected to their regular school, but the learning will take place remotely. For staff members, we'll do our best to provide remote working options for those with health concerns, or vulnerable family members at home. We're also purchasing protective equipment for our staff. We'll make sure that every staff member is trained and involved in the development of procedures in their buildings. We announced a few weeks ago that we are delaying the start of school by a week to the week of August 24th to allow our staff members time to attend these trainings and to establish procedures for their school. Looking ahead, we should expect conditions to continue to shift and change as we restart school and into the fall. We should also expect some shift as our plans go from concepts to actual implementation. Because of this, we need to remain open to additional changes and feedback, including ongoing feedback from our staff and our students who will be working to implement this plan. These are tough choices and trade-offs at every turn, but we feel this plan works to balance the need to reopen schools to the greatest extent we can out of concerns around equity and learning, along with important concerns around public health measures to protect our students, staff, members, and the community. Please take the time to review this plan in more depth by visiting www.restartjeffco.com, and thanks for your continuing support of Jeffco Public Schools.
Now I'll turn it over to Tom.
Great.
Whoops.
Great. So I know that many of you spoke with Dr. Johnson earlier this morning, and I would just want to join in singing his praises. I think he's been an incredible asset to the entire Jeffco community, but certainly to us at Jeffco Public Schools. One of the things that Christopher and I had conversations with Dr. Johnson about it in our efforts to reopen to the greatest extent possible are these four principles of place, space, people, and time. And these four principles, we adhere to these throughout all of our planning for our restart plan, which came out just a couple of days ago. So it applies to buses, to classrooms, to cafeteria. So place is essentially just maximizing the amount of airflow, right? Whether it's indoors or outdoors through ventilation or opening windows. We want as much fresh air as possible. Space is 6 feet of social distancing or the greatest extent of social distancing where possible. People, you heard Dr. Glass and Christopher mention, we are trying to keep consistent groups or cohorts together to minimize the opportunity of spread. And then time, trying to minimize the amount of time that people are interacting outside of their cohort groups. So that looks like one-way hallways during transitions, keeping groups together during lunch rather than allowing for what might normally have been pre-COVID of an opportunity to socialize with greater classmates. Christopher, you can go to the next slide, please. So what these four principles really mean tangibly is 6 feet of social distancing whenever possible. As I mentioned, there will be no use of communal spaces for large groups. There will be no assemblies, no kind of large groups in any of our gymnasiums for events. Students and staff face coverings are going to be required when 6 feet of social distancing cannot be maintained. There will be, and there are guidelines for when masks are not required that are articulated in the plan. Daily symptom screenings upon entering any of our facilities. Students and staff will have their temperatures taken. Hand washing and hygiene protocols, cohort groupings, and then, as I mentioned, the use in how we organize students to both enter the building and transition between classes. Next slide, please, Christopher. So really, just kind of from a high level, what this looks like from an elementary model, it's much less, disruptive from a scheduling standpoint at elementary school, right? Our elementary school students are used to staying with the same group throughout most of the day. Where we see differences in our elementary model is recess, lunch, etc., where they will be staying within their same cohort even during those times. At the middle and high school models, we are meeting with our principals this upcoming Monday and Wednesday to have some additional specifics around what the schedule looks like at the secondary level. As of right now, what we've articulated is students will participate in no more than 4 classes during a day. So that's, again, through that idea of maintaining limited interaction across cohorts. So there's still some details that need to be worked out alongside our school leaders on how we will decide upon a model at that point. But we, as of right now, we know that there will be no more than 4 classes during a single day. So that kind of concludes the information that Christopher and I wanted to share with you. We're happy to take questions if that's part of the format here.
Absolutely. And I have a couple, thank you for that, for what you provided so far. I have a couple questions in the chat, and I'll start with that. Is each school implementing its own virtual teaching? So I guess this question is more going towards the online or the remote learning. Is each school implementing its own virtual teaching? How will the district make sure the kids will have a good virtual experience across the board? And teachers that are effective, virtual academy.
Yep, so we do have a virtual school in Jeffco, and it's Jeffco Virtual Academy, and that's grades 6 through 12. And that school is at capacity. And so that is a separate school that we have for total virtual environment. All of our schools in Jeffco will have a remote environment. So the survey that went along with the plan on Wednesday are asking parents, now that you have more information about the plan, are you choosing for your child to come back in an in-person environment or a remote environment? So if your child attends Lastly Elementary, for example, and you choose the remote environment, Lastly Elementary will have a remote experience for your child. And then along with that, there will be teachers, depending on the number of students at the school that choose the remote environment, there will be the teacher that will create that experience for the child. And if it's in the elementary school, probably that one teacher, or at the secondary level, it'll be specific by content. So that will be directed and handled from that school.
One thing to just quickly add to that is, yes, so each school will have their own remote learning classrooms, as Christopher mentioned, but they are supported centrally with some guidelines and curriculum so that there is similar experiences for a 4th grade student at South Lakewood, for example, as there might be for students at West Jefferson Elementary, so that their supports are going to be provided for all Jeffco schools for both in-person and remote learning. And just to add on to that a little bit is, as we went into the remote learning this past spring, we facilitated several pulse surveys to students and to families, and we learned a lot about what good remote learning looks like. And one of the big takeaways from that is that even in a remote environment, our families and our students want interactive learning opportunities, similar to what we're doing here. That there was a strong desire for, whether it's through Zoom or whatever it is, but to have an opportunity to discuss and collaborate and have opportunities to have interactive learning rather than just completing an assignment online. The other thing that we learned from those surveys is that our students from underserved backgrounds, free and reduced lunch, English language learners, for example, did not have as positive an experience with remote learning as our more affluent families did. So we understand that we need to provide additional synchronous learning opportunities, as well as we need to organize additional supports for some of our students who did not have as positive an experience this past spring.
The next question on here is, going back to the in-person learning, will the class sizes be normal? How big are the groups expected to be? And I think I'm going to add to that, just as far as the term cohort groups and sizes, how large of a cohort would the kids be assigned to?
Right, so the guidelines have changed. As I mentioned before, it was 10 people in a classroom, and the guidelines have changed from more like the 20 to the 25 student grouping. So it'll be a typical classroom at the elementary level, and there are guidelines for elementary class sizes in Jeffco already, and then a typical class size at the secondary level.
And that,
So with that being said, for the middle school and high school that's used to changing classes, how will one cohort follow through and be assigned the first 4 classes all together and they move along together since they are changing classrooms or have been in the past?
Yeah, so as you heard Tom talk about, the focus is, and you heard Dr. Glass talked about, the focus is on cohorting of students. So I'll talk about that a little bit more just to give some clarity behind that. So the concept of cohorting and the reason why it works more easily at the elementary level is, as we know, an elementary student typically has one core teacher during the day, in 4th grade, for example, and they spend the majority of the day with that one teacher. They may have specialist teachers, art, music, or PE during the day, but they stay together with that cohort of students. So that's why the 100% plan originally, when we had announced it, we were bringing elementary schools back 100%. We announced it a couple weeks ago. At the secondary level, we are still able to maintain cohort classes, and I'll give you an example, but it becomes more complex, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. So for example, a freshman in high school, the majority of freshmen typically take English 9, Algebra 1, US Government, and Earth Science. Those are pretty typical courses for a freshman. There could be a situation because a student can attend a maximum of 4 classes a day at the secondary. That's how we have it right now. There could be a student at Conifer High School that has all 4 classes in a day with the same cohort of students because so many freshmen take the same classes. So that could happen. On the second day, where the student takes the remainder of their classes, it could be the remaining 2 classes, the remaining 2 electives, or it could be 3 classes. Those would be electives, but now we know there's a lot of choices, and that's why we call them electives, that students elect. So those could be singletons like art and pottery or band. So that would be a situation where that student would not be in the same cohort on that day, or possibly on the same day. So that's why we have limited. We've said a student can be in a maximum of 4 different cohorts during the day, because there could be a student that is in English 9 honors, is in band, is in geometry, and then is in pottery, and that could be a day. Well, if you notice, that is not the same cohort. It's gonna be very difficult to find 25 students who have that kind of a schedule. So that could be a situation where the student is in 4 different cohorts during a day, and we wanna limit the amount of cohorts that a student is in. But that's how we're basing it. And the same thing at the middle school level, the majority of middle school kids take the same type of classes, so it'll be the same situation. We will cohort them to the best of our ability in our schools at Conifer and at West Jefferson Middle School. But once again, there's going to be situations where, because of the complexity of classes that the student chooses, they will be in more than one cohort. Does that help?
It does. Alyssa, if you have any more questions on that one, put that in the text and we'll bring that up again. But I think that covers your question. Another question is linked to the slides. So I'll talk to Christopher and Tom about possibly getting those slides and being able to push those out to the attendees later.
You bet.
Let me scroll through these questions real quick. Are there any protocols around testing teachers and/or staff or kids? And I'm going to combine those 2 questions, because there's that one, and then this next question from Cindy. The point of opening the schools is to continue education. How is the district going to measure education deliverables and outcomes? The fall and winter student map scores were stagnant or declining. The normal spring map wasn't given. What assessments will the district do and when to gauge how much students have fallen behind? And when will this information be communicated to the parents?
So I'll take the testing question, and then Dr. McDermott, you want to take the second question about the assessment part of it?
Certainly.
So the testing, so we are exploring testing. And as you can imagine, testing is not widespread at this point in time, and it is not cost effective at this point in time. So we are exploring that. Our Julie Wilkin is our director of health services in Jefferson County Public Schools. And she is looking into testing, what that could look like and what the cost could be, what the availability is. So at this point in time, we do not have, just like our neighboring school districts, they also do not have a plan or the capability at this point in time to have widespread testing. We are looking into it. we would like that to be taking place in Jefferson County as well as in the metro area as quickly as we can down the line. But at this point in time, we don't have any more information about that.
And regarding the assessments, so we certainly do expect that there's going to be learning loss that's been associated with this time out of in-person learning. We have a variety of assessments for both in-class assessments as well as some district assessments, as the map was mentioned. We will continue to administer those assessments. And one of our strategies for addressing what we expect to be the learning loss is something we refer to as proficiency scales. So that's something that as an organization, we have committed a lot of time and effort into and providing training for our staff. And essentially what a proficiency scale does is it articulates the different skills that are necessary for students to demonstrate grade level performance. We're hopeful that using this tool with our alongside our educators in connection with those assessment results, that we can more accurately pinpoint where student learning happened and use our instructional resources to address those skills. So it's certainly going to be a challenge this year, just given the incredible logistical and management challenges of operating school during a pandemic. And we also know that student educational experiences and academic acquisition are incredibly important. So we have strategies to address that learning loss as well.
Great. Karen and Cindy, let me know if you have any other questions in addition to that, or if that answered your questions. Another question that has come up is, as far as extracurricular activities, sports, clubs, after school activities, how will all of that be handled?
So at this time, as far as athletics, we did come back to conditioning with our athletic program. So students right now are engaging with their coaches in conditioning. And what we're doing is, if it is a sport that involves a ball, like football or volleyball or baseball, that is not part of the conditioning, as that could be a contaminant. So students are engaged and they're getting ready for fall sports, if that happens to be at this point in time. We do not have any clarity from CHSAA in terms of the activities. That will be a school-based decision as far as the activities that take place in the school and who's engaging in those activities. Once again, what we're trying to do is not be a vector for the disease and transmission of the disease. So that would be another cohort, if you think about it. If a student would go through the school day and be in a class or two with different cohorts, that activity would then be another cohort. And this is the concern about multiple cohorts. If you can imagine, folks, if we have a student that tests positive, or we have a staff member that tests positive, whoever was in the cohort with that staff member or that student, through public guidelines right now, they need to be isolated and then quarantined for 14 days. So as you can imagine, as we create more and more cohorts for a student to be in, there is more potential for a higher number of students and staff that would be out for 14 days. So we have to limit that as much as possible. But there's that balance. Remember how I started the conversation, those guardrails between public health and then educating students in equity and access. So that's that balance back and forth, is, do we go so far to the extreme of public health that we damage and limit the student experience? Or do we go totally towards the student experience, where we are now becoming a vector and it's not a safe situation for our students and staff? So we're always trying to find that balance and that fine line right in between.
Yes, and it's an incredibly difficult time. When you talk about the cohorts and somebody getting infected, say one person is in 4 cohorts, they're infected. Do all 4 of those cohorts then need to quarantine?
So, and that kind of depends on the time of day and what the symptoms are, but it could be a situation where the student or a staff member, there was a positive and they were symptomatic during the school day, that through contact tracing, that's what the phrase is. So if that happened during the school day, the contact tracing would be done in cooperation with public health. And then we'd have to determine the number of people and the distance of contact that that student or staff member had with individuals during that period of time that public health thought that they had the virus and they were shedding the virus. And that number of people would then have to be quarantined for 14 days. So this has happened already in Jefferson County. It's happened in the nation, where through contact tracing, people have been called and said, we do have a positive case. We think that you came in contact with that individual, and then we would like you to quarantine for 14 days. So yes, that would be the situation, which is why we can't just come back to school in a traditional environment where students come back, they go to all their classes during the day, because in that situation, if we would have a student that was symptomatic and would be declared a positive case of COVID, all of the students in all of their classes and all of their teachers would have to be quarantined for 14 days. So we're trying to limit that contact.
Okay. And then if a cohort is quarantined, then they transfer to online schooling.
Correct.
So for the online schooling, does that mean that you say that there's one English teacher? Is that English teacher then now responsible for maintaining the online classroom as well as the face-to-face classroom? So that if a student does have to quarantine, they're still within that class and still interacting with the same teacher, or does that change?
So this will be the dynamic part of it. And it's a great opportunity for schools to be looking at this and make sure that the structures they have in place can meet the needs of not only their staffing, but their students. So it might look differently to every school based on the number of students that are in a remote environment, even to begin with, that the family might choose. So an elementary school, it might look like this. If there was an elementary school like West Jeff Elementary or Elk Creek, where there are 3 third grade teachers, if 1/3 of those students are in a remote environment, then one of those third grade teachers really could be the remote teacher, and the other 2 teachers could be the in-person teacher. And as students move in and out of that remote environment, they could probably handle that. At the secondary level would look a little bit different because it's content specific at the secondary level. So at Conifer High School, for example, and based off the survey results that we've been receiving since the release of the model on May 22nd, it's telling us that 10% of our families would choose a remote environment. So you figure if we have 85,000 students in Jeffco, we figure that 8,500 of our families would choose remote. So then you can break that down to Conifer with a population of around 800 students. You could do the math on that. About 80 students would probably choose remote. So what West Paxton needs to be thinking about is, how will that work? And will West have some core content teachers that would handle the remote learning environment for all students in math, regardless of level? That might be how West tackles that one. But that'll have to be a conversation that West will have with his administrative team as they begin to come back on next Wednesday. Wes, of course, started on this Wednesday. And then as he starts to engage with his teachers over this and his community as well. So that might look a little bit differently from school to school. And the administrative team and staff might have to adapt, because we might have one school that has a high percentage of families that choose remote, or they have to engage in remote because of a positive case and contact tracing. So that situation is probably going to be fluid as we move through the school year and we adapt to whatever is coming as a result of COVID.
Okay, I have one more question from Cindy, and we'll end with that as far as the school topic. How will the district make sure the remote teachers are doing a good, consistent job? What is the accountability that's being set up for that?
So I'll talk a little bit and have Tom jump in here too. So you heard what Tom talked about, that through the survey, we found that the remote experience was not a consistent, equitable experience across Jefferson County. So we are now working, we learned a lot from the experience in the spring. So we are now working centrally to develop some loose and tights around remote working, around remote learning. So if I'll introduce two terms, maybe you've heard them, maybe you haven't, but it's around asynchronous learning and synchronous learning. Asynchronous learning, that environment would be where a teacher would deliver learning to a student, and the student would engage in that learning and then turn it in via paper or project in kind of a time frame. So that really is more of a student-directed type of learning. It would be the asynchronous learning. Synchronous learning is when a teacher would say, I'm starting my class at 9:30 on Tuesday, and all of my students in the remote environment need to be on at 9:30. And the students would have probably watched a video regarding that direct instruction, maybe 10 minutes of direct instruction the night before. But when they get on with the teacher is going to use that time like it's gold, because the teacher has the student in front of him or her. And that teacher is going to engage the students in some kind of a project or a problem to solve or something to create. So that's synchronous learning, is when the students are there in front of the teacher, they're engaging interaction. The teacher's moving those students into breakout rooms off of Zoom, for example. So that's different than the asynchronous. We're looking at introducing much more of that synchronous learning in this environment as we move into remote in the fall. And so that's going to look a little bit differently. And it just needs to, because that's what our parents and that's what our students ask for. Is we did well in it. Some students thrived in it, if you can imagine. I have a high school daughter, and there were some classes she just thought was wonderful, but other classes she definitely could have used more of that synchronous, that contact with her classmates and the contact with her teachers. So Tom, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think Christopher did a great job of articulating some of the kind of district level learnings that we had in facilitating remote learning, right? We know we need more synchronous opportunities, and we know we need additional supports for our free and reduced lunch and English language learner students. So we will provide supports and training around those two expectations and kind of areas of improvement that we've learned about. I think more specific to the question is, we will also have the regular evaluation processes in place. So this past year, there was no evaluation process for the spring, but from CDE guidelines, we expect that will be in place for this upcoming school year. So there will be feedback opportunities and an evaluation process similar to that of a normal school year.
Okay, great. Well, Christopher and Tom, thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is great information. I know our community has lots of questions, and I'm sure a lot of communities do, just trying to figure out what's going to happen and how this is going to affect our kids and ultimately our community. So thank you for all the work you've been doing to make this happen for us and get back in school and jumping on this morning. We appreciate that.
Melanie, if I could just say thank you for this opportunity. As you can imagine, quickly changing times right now, and we're trying to do something that is very different than what we're used to here in Jefferson County. And we just appreciate the opportunity to come on and answer questions, because you folks are the leaders in the Conifer community, and we know people are going to be asking you questions. And if you could please dispel some myths and provide information for people so there's some clarity, because then it reduces the anxiety and it reduces the fear. Our goal for the plan on Wednesday was twofold. Number one was to put the plan out with so much information. If you've read it, maybe some of you have. I have a feeling Ms. Dahlkamper has. It's 44 pages, and it is in depth with multiple links. We put it out there because what we wanted to have happen is we wanted a community member or family member, a parent, guardian to read it and really reduce their anxiety, and for them to say, the Jefferson County is doing everything they can to create the kind of environment that I want for my child, so I want to send my child back to school. So that was the one part of it. The second part of it was for our staff members to read it and think, you know what, I'm so excited to go back to school. That's why I became a teacher. I want to be in person in front of my students, and I am confident and I feel really good about this, so I want to come back to school as well. So we have individuals who don't feel that way. And if they don't, Tom and I just want to continue to have opportunities to talk to those individuals and try to reduce their anxiety, answer their questions, so people are set and ready to make a comfortable choice on how they're going to return their child back to school or how they're going to return back to work as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And I'll pass on the PowerPoint and the video that from Dr. Glass is posted on Facebook. So there was a link that Jefferson County shared on Facebook that has a lot of this information and links to those reports. So I'll post that again on the Conifer Facebook page, and we'll get that shared and send that out to everybody as well. Thank you too for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Stay well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And anybody else that is able to stay on is 9:23. We're going to jump into the breakout room. So if you'd like to stay on for a little bit longer and just talk with some people, we are going to go ahead